Welcome back everyone to Northern Maple. I hope you're having a great start of the weekend. I for one cannot believe that it's already the end of May and summer is finally around the corner for us Canadians. I'm very much so looking forward to being able to smell the sunshine in the air once more. On today's episode, we're going to be doing a roundup of this week's political news as promised, and I want to start with what I think is the most surprising of all. On Wednesday, Andrew Scheer, the interim leader of the opposition in the House of Commons, made this striking statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to his first official question period. This is where democracy lives, and this is where we provide rigorous scrutiny on every word he says and every dollar he spends on behalf of Canadians. Now, let's talk about those words and dollars. During the election campaign, it was elbows up as he put retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Then secretly, he dropped those tariffs to effectively zero. But he didn't stop there. He told Canadians that the government would collect $20 billion in revenue from those tariffs and use it to cost his platform. Now that those tariffs are going to bring in $0, two quick questions. Why wasn't he honest with Canadians during the election? And how is he going to make up the shortfall? Is he going to borrow it, print it, or tax it?
You might be asking yourself why this stands out. Well, that's because just one day earlier, an up-and-coming citizen reporter made a very similar point on her show. That's right, I said it first. Now, I'm not suggesting Andrew Scheer tuned into my show, but for someone with just 9 episodes under her belt, I'd say I'm off to a great start. I nailed this one. I got it. And on that note, let's see how the Prime Minister responded to Scheer's question.
Just said, Mr. Speaker, our tariffs have maximum impact on the United States, minimum impact on Canada, and we are dedicating all the revenues from those tariffs to supporting the workers and businesses affected by the unjustified American actions.
Hear, hear.
It seems Carney is sticking to the Liberal playbook, sidestepping direct answers, never truly answering our questions, and these are critical questions. Carney pledged to maintain tariffs on U.S. goods until the U.S. shows Canada respect and commits to free and fair trade, promising that the $20 billion in tariff revenue would support Canadians. Yet, with the removal of nearly all of those tariffs, Canadians are now being warned that the cost of living is set to rise once more. And our Prime Minister has yet to explain how he'll deliver on that $20 billion commitment. And let me be very clear here. Raising $20 billion through tariffs is very different than raising it by taxing Canadians even more than they already are or by printing the money. Neither of these two options actually help Canadians with the cost of living. It just fuels its inflation. But here's where things get murkier. Despite the uncertainty around this $20 billion, Carney has secured a whopping $486 billion. This figure represents the government's proposed budget for this fiscal year. Pierre Poilievre slammed this budget, pointing out it reflects an 8% increase in government spending from the previous year. Carney, however, promised to cap government spending growth at 2%. The catch? That 2% cap applies only to operating expenses, while the $486 billion budget includes broader expenditures like capital investments and infrastructure. So, has Carney broken his promise to limit operating budget growth to 2%? We can't actually say because the Liberal Party has provided limited details on how that $486 billion will be allocated. Without a detailed budget, which won't be presented until the fall, Canadians are being left in the dark on how our taxpayer dollars are being spent once again. What we do know is that an 8% spending increase could balloon deficits, potentially driving debt servicing costs to $68.7 billion by 2028-2029 fiscal year. This could squeeze funding for essential services like healthcare. It makes you wonder, could the pay raise MPs received on April 1st have been better directed toward healthcare, which Carney calls a fundamental right for all Canadians? And should MPs receive raises only when Canadian standard of living improves? I don't know. These are questions for you to answer. Feel free to have at it in the comments. Now, for an update on the tariff situation, The US-Canada trade relationship is marked by escalating tension due to tariffs on steel and aluminum, with significant implications for both economies. On May 30th, President Trump announced a doubling of the US tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 25% to 50% effective June 4th to bolster the US steel industry, particularly in Pennsylvania, through a partnership with Japan's Own Steel. Canada is the largest supplier of steel to the US, and that means we face economic pressure. With Canadian steel industry warning of job losses and production pauses, Canadian leaders have called for emergency measures like wage subsidies to protect workers, while Carney has vowed to maintain retaliatory tariffs until the US commits to fair trade. However, Carney has reduced retaliatory tariffs to nearly zero, so which tariffs is he talking about exactly? The US plans to double steel and aluminum tariffs, which will cripple Canada's ability to collect the promised funds. Adding complexity to the challenge of following along this tariff dance, on May 28th, a US federal trade court ruled Trump's tariffs illegal, citing insufficient justification under Section 238. But the Supreme Court temporarily reinstated them on May 30th via an emergency state requested by the Trump administration, pending appeal, keeping Canada's counter tariffs relevant but complicating Carney's revenue goal. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture for a moment. Trump is using tariffs to encourage Americans to revive their industrial sector. Similar to Canada, America has the resources to be a thriving nation, and they don't need to rely on other nations to support their economy. It is very clear that Trump is not interested in globalism. Why? Because Americans fought for their sovereignty. That is who they are, and Trump is trying to protect the United States from being under the rule of a Marxist technocracy. Although the tariffs are going to hurt the Canadian economy, that was not the president's intent or goal. President Trump is doing what all national leaders should be striving to do: make their country better, stronger, and freer for all its citizens, unlike the global elites. But I'll save that for a topic for a future episode. Let's stick to this week's roundup. Now for the Golden Globe. Golden Dome. Just a few days ago, President Donald Trump unveiled the ambitious Golden Dome missile defense system, a $175 billion initiative modeled after Israel's Iron Dome, but designed to counter long-range and hypersonic missiles across the U.S. using a space-based interceptor. On May 27th, Trump issued a controversial ultimatum to Canada via Truth Social, stating it very much wants Canada to join the system, but must pay $61 billion to participate as a sovereign nation, or join for free by becoming the cherished 51st state. Mark Carney, who met Trump on May 6 to discuss security, including the Golden Dome, firmly rejected annexation, emphasizing Canada's sovereignty and exploring European defense ties instead. King Charles III's speech to Parliament on May 27th, asserting Canada's independence, underscored this rebuff. Although the system's potential to protecting North America, the cost of this project is estimated to reach $542 billion over 20 years. Let's sum this up. Canada's fiscal landscape has lurched from one liberal promise to another, with little to show for it. Under Justin Trudeau, the claim that the budget will balance itself led to 9 years of deficits, doubling the federal debt to $1.2 trillion and posting a recorded high $61.9 billion deficit in last year's fiscal year, as runaway spending on programs like the Canada Child Benefit outpaced economic growth. Now, Mark Carney, who campaigned on fiscal responsibility, has followed suit, promising $20 billion in tariff revenue to support Canadians, while secretly slashing tariffs near to zero, with the U.S. doubling steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% on June 4th, and Canada's $60 billion in counter tariffs on U.S. goods like steel, automobiles, and orange juice weakened by exceptions. That $20 billion looks increasingly out of reach. Worse, Carney's alleged $486 billion budget and 8% spending hike has no federal budget to back it up, leaving Canadians in the dark about how billions are being spent, from debt interest costs projected to hit $53.7 billion this year to potential contributions to Trump's $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense system. This shift from Trudeau's fiscal fantasy to Carney's opaque spending raises some old questions. Who's paying for the Liberal promises? It's probably our tax dollars. Now for some quick highlights. Canada Post teeters on the edge as the Canadian Union of Postal Workers overtime ban sparks mail delays, with the corporation's final offer to 55,000 workers meeting resistance, prompting the Jobs Minister to intervene. King Charles III's historic Ottawa visit, including the first royal throne speech since 1977, reaffirmed Canada's stand against Trump's 51st state taunts, while promising tax cuts to first-time homebuyers. Wildfires rage in Manitoba, forcing the province's largest evacuation in living memory and sending hazardous smoke across 24 U.S. states. Alberta's wildfires, with 52 blazes burning and 30 out of control as of today, have ravaged northern communities, forcing several areas to evacuate. Former Alberta forestry official John Arthur warned that pine beetle-killed trees, a known fire risk for years, were left unaddressed for decades due to a lagging forest management, directly fueling the aggressive fires. Forestry Minister Todd Lewin, despite claiming Alberta was well prepared for the 2025 season, faces criticism for inadequate mitigation, with experts like Ken Doman warning that unremoved dead trees west of Calgary worsened the crisis, spotlighting a failure to act on preventable risks. So it raises serious questions about government priorities. If climate change isn't the sole driver of these fires, as experts suggest, why isn't Carney's administration acting decisively? For a government obsessed with slashing carbon emissions, Carney's failure to invest in proactive forest management, like clearing dead trees to curb fire intensity, is baffling, especially when wildfires emit massive carbon dioxide, dwarfing Canada's annual emissions. Instead, the Liberals pour $1.3 billion annually into CBC, a mature broadcaster that could stand on its own, while conservation efforts, like wildfire prevention, languish. With the April 2025 election behind him, you'd expect Carney to champion these measures to protect habitats and align with his climate rhetoric. But the silence is deafening, leaving Canadians to wonder if his green agenda has ulterior motives. Well, that's it for this week's roundup. As always, if you have anything additional to add, leave a comment and I'll look into it for you. And on that note, have a great rest of your weekend and I'll see you next time. Bye.